Hello and welcome back to Underlab. You've probably heard of or seen the If Undertale Was Realistic series. Well, it got me thinking, what if Undertale was realistic? Like really realistic. So realistic that it existed within the confines of our own reality. That would mean no monsters, no magic, and no ambiguous concepts like coloured souls or determination. It would also likely mean that the human would die the second the game starts after falling from such a tremendous height. So just for the fun of it, let's take a look at what Undertale would have been like with its realism amped to 11 out of 10. How long do you think you could survive in a life like Undertale? Probably not as long as you hoped, and you'll soon see why. When Undertale begins, a small child falls down a hole. While we don't know for certain whether Frisk experienced the same course of events as Chara or Kara, we have no reason to assume they didn't. So just how far did they fall? Mount Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, is almost 9,000 meters tall. But to tell you truthfully, we have no idea how tall Mount Ebott is, nor how far you would have to fall to enter the underground. There's no way Frisk would have survived falling such a significant distance without at least receiving a concussion. Moving into the next room, and we'd come face to face with a terrifying flower. But then again, flowers can't exactly do much other than sway back and forth in the wind, and then you have to consider that there wouldn't be a flower to begin with no light for Flowey to photosynthesize from. Therefore, a child with a severely bruised head would then proceed into the ruins that probably don't exist, as the monsters that built them were never real in the first place. Let's just assume that for some reason, there's structures underground. Well, unfortunately, they'd have caved in on themselves long ago, considering that the weight of an entire mountain is bearing down on a few flimsy looking pillars. I think the monsters must have been using quite a lot of magic to stay alive for so long. Of course, magic doesn't exist in the real world unless you attend Hogwarts. Walking through the ruins, and we'd find ourselves encountering extremely hostile frogs, vegetables that have apparently come to life, and once again things that literally don't exist. Thankfully, our helpful companion, a goat that apparently has fashion sense, has decided to view us as their wayward child and guide us through this peculiar place. This same goat has apparently mastered the art of spontaneous combustion, and can conjure flames through manipulation of the latent chemicals around them. If DC or Marvel would like to get in contact to buy this incredible character idea, I regret to inform you that it's not for sale. Oh, we're also meant to come across a ghost. Yes, somehow I don't think so. After a tragic separation from our four-legged stepmother, we'd step outside into Snowdin forest before instantly freezing to death. That's because we're apparently inside an underground ice cavern, a phenomenon that only occurs owing to extremely low temperatures. With nothing but a stripy shirt and brown pants to protect us, the power of science estimates that we'd last about 3 seconds before we succumb to brain death by freezing. So let's imagine that this time Frisk makes the wise decision of actually putting on a coat or something before going outside. We'd immediately be greeted by 2 idle skeletons, who apparently got their jobs by sheer luck, as everyone knows that skeletons are capable of quite literally nothing. Instead of encountering all sorts of quirky and arbitrary puzzles throughout the forest, we'd instead have to go through the epic ordeal of walking through a few meters of snow. At one point we technically should come across a snowman with a singular wish, but not only would we not find that, there wouldn't be a snowman to begin with, as you have to remember that the monsters who built him don't exist. Moving swiftly onwards, and we wouldn't come across the gauntlet of deadly terror, as those lazy skeletons still haven't bothered to do anything. It's almost as if they're dead or something. Snowdin Town is a great place full of escapees from the local pet shop, including a rabbit that thinks it's a store owner apparently, and a bear. Once again, all those slightly more outlandish monsters aren't real, and Frisk would be left to wonder whether they stumbled onto the abandoned set of a new Narnia film. Before leaving Snowdin, it seems that one of the skeletons from earlier has somehow made its way in order to block our path. Of course, we'd probably just walk over or around it, considering that it's still capable of doing absolutely nothing. Moving into Waterfall, and we'd come under the unrelenting assault of an extremely aggressive fish. Thankfully, they wouldn't be able to follow us unless we decided to go swimming, as everyone knows that gills require water to breathe, just like how we can't breathe underwater. Undyne in the real world would be less Undyne the Undying and more Undyne the Unbreathing. Navigating Waterfall would be pretty difficult, as in the real world, vast chasms and chambers would be flooded with water. It's very unlikely that the symmetrical patterns and predictable layout of the area would occur in real life. It seems like the monsters have most likely carved out artificial canals throughout the area to control the streams of water. However, as the only so-called monsters we have to work with are wild animals and skeletons, I doubt any of the important work would get done. However, as I've mentioned in the past, things like glowing crystals and bioluminescent fungi do exist in real life, so the cavern might not be pitch black. It would still certainly be a lot darker than it is in game, though the darkness of reality is depicted rather well in the area where we can only navigate through use of the glowing mushrooms. Other than that, Waterfall is one of the more realistic and survivable areas within Undertale. There's places in real life that could compare. Moving on into Hotland, and like how we froze in Snowdin, we'd probably instantly overheat until we die thanks to the extreme temperature. Standing so close to molten magma without any protective clothing is incredibly dangerous. The heat alone would probably be enough to cook our body like an egg in a frying pan. Truthfully, getting through this area would probably be impossible without the proper equipment, and the blaze skirt we got from Waterfall isn't going to do the job. Unless the ground is much further from the magma than how the in-game art depicts it, Frisk's adventure would surely end here. Though for the sake of continuing the theory, let's say that we're somehow able to stand the heat. It isn't really clear how a small yellow lizard would be capable of building an entire laboratory, let alone a fully automated artificial intelligence. As ghosts aren't real, there would have never been anyone to possess Metaton's body, and even if Alphys was somehow able to muster the genius to create a fully functioning robot, nothing in the current age is anywhere near as advanced as Metaton. We've taught AIs to think to an extent by teaching them through conversation and various complex algorithms, but none of them really resemble a human being, not yet at least. Proceeding through Hotland, and it seems highly unlikely that we could use the steam vents to leap over the chasms of magma. In all likelihood, the steam would just burn off our flesh, and if it really did have enough power to take us off our feet, we could be sent hurtling in any direction, thanks to the nature of physics. It would most likely result in us getting thrown off the edge, and I'm sure you can imagine what would happen next. The one advantage of Hotland being real would be that Alphys couldn't conduct her ridiculous scheme to earn our friendship by repeatedly throwing various traps and Metaton in our way, so maybe it actually balances out at the end of the day. If we somehow unimaginably made our way through Hotland, we're supposed to reach the core. It was originally designed by Gaster, a character who seems to flit in and out of existence. He's the living embodiment of chaos theory, and technically the core could exist thanks to the physics-defying nature of Gaster, though in all probability there would likely be nothing there. As for Metaton Resort, I'm not sure how a robot that couldn't have been built in the first place would have managed to go and establish his own hotel chain. Can you really call it a hotel anyhow? They don't even put mints on the pillows. Finally, we'd reached New Home, which is about as empty as you'd expect it to be. Our epic adventure would come to a conclusion with us meeting one lost goat, a particularly big one that owns a trident. Asgore seems to think that his people are trapped behind a magical barrier, but someone forgot to tell him that magic isn't real and that he could have left at any time. Before we leave though, the evil flower from earlier makes its reappearance and startles us by doing nothing. I doubt I need to remind you, but flowers can't actually do anything. This particular flower also has the ability to turn into a goat, and by this point I'm sure Frisk would be completely weirded out and convinced that they've gone insane. The human would finally escape this bizarre place, only to probably throw themselves off the cliff edge in order to cope with the absolute madness they've just been exposed to. Something tells me Undertale wouldn't exactly work if it was realistic, but then again, who says that monsters aren't truly real? Well, that's the end of this rather crazy theory. The point of it was to try and see how much of Undertale could be recreated in the real world under completely natural circumstances. Unfortunately, it seems like very little makes sense, and there'd be far too many wild animals wandering about and causing chaos. Clearly, both monsters and magic would have to exist in real life in order for Undertale to work. Who knows though, if the Underground was buried away and forgotten about, who would ever know about its secrets? Do you think you could survive the Underground, and that have explained how dangerous it could potentially be? Also, can you think of any crazy ways Undertale would be affected if it was more realistic? As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't freeze to death or fall into a volcano, and I'll see you next time. Before I go, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to my patrons. My head scientists, Asgore and She, Cameron Vigil, K Jensen, Sophronius, Zoada Vionta, and Isidro54321. And my Underlab scientists, Crystal Sleet, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arlett, Marisa Ray, Corey Kidwell, Yusho Crony, Sarah Wydra, and Emily Gatewood. Thanks to all the names you see here, this channel is able to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out the Patreon link below, as well as the video that explains why I'd so massively appreciate your contribution.